Hello. Hello. Oh, is it on? It's on. Okay, sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaitlyn Jones. I'm a senior accessibility product manager over on the gaming accessibility team at Xbox, and I'm super excited to be here today. And I'll be talking a little bit about some of the latest developments that have come out of Xbox over the past few months on both the physical hardware side, and then I'll also touch on a few of our platform accessibility settings around input. So like I mentioned, platform settings first, some new features and supports that have come out. I'll talk about our new adaptive thumbstick topper program that we launched this past August. And then I'll dive into the Xbox Adaptive Joystick that we also announced recently and some of the development story behind that device. So for these quick updates, I'm going to breeze through them kind of news update style. Ian already stole my thunder on a few of them by mentioning them in the news update. It's cool. Um, But I do have two asks for y'all as I do breeze through these. So first for, the players and the advocates in the room and those who are watching online. Eric just talked a lot about different communities who are using gaming or maybe wanting to, but discoverability and awareness of what's out there in the accessibility space is I think something that we need to improve upon. And, when somebody's not aware of a feature or support, they obviously can't use it because they don't know it exists. So please help spread the word to your communities, especially if you are part of communities not typically in the gaming spaces that are looking, through a lot of these channels. And of course, reach out to us, provide feedback on what we can do better and how we can improve. And for the game developers in the room and online, platform features are great. I'm so thankful that we have them. They will never be as powerful or effective as a setting or support that's specific to your title, one that really addresses the individual and specific mechanics and challenges that your title poses players. So while these platform settings are a great catch-all and they are used by a lot of people, please, also think about ways that you can implement some of these things and more into your own titles to provide an even better experience for players. This is the one Ian already talked about. It's still fine. Um, but we did this past May release a new firmware update for the Xbox Adaptive Controller. It expands the number of buttons for devices plugged into the USB port of it. So we used to support 8, it now supports 12. It also supports a hat switch and then up to 2 sticks in a single device into the one port on either side. Toggle holds as well. Very excited for this one. Similar to sticky keys on a keyboard, for any mechanics that are difficult, maybe pressing a button, holding a button for a prolonged period can be difficult for players. So the ability to press it once, have it stay held down, press it again, and it releases. And these are available for both any of the ports and buttons on the adaptive controller, but also on our Xbox Elite controllers as well. But this one is new that I didn't tell Ian about, so I can talk about it first. It's very new. It is just now rolling out through some of our insider preview rings, and over the next month or so, it'll be available to GA. So very, very new. But one of them is actually mapping a hat switch to stick movement. So I can't tell you, and Eric talked a lot about this as well, but how many times when we're doing adaptive setups, and it's really difficult when a player does not have the mobility to control 2 different sticks, both character and camera movement with one hand or, one body part. It's a very big challenge, those dual stick games. So while this isn't, a perfect solution, what you can do now is if you have a large flight stick device like the Logitech Flight Stick, you can actually map that hat switch as your other stick. So I have a video here, and it is the Logitech 3D Pro Flight Stick. It's connected to an adaptive controller. I'm playing Minecraft in it, and I basically have, what is it? Let's see. So character movement using the D-pad on the flight stick, and then camera movement using the entire articulating range of the flight stick itself, essentially giving you 2 sticks in a single movement or a single device. I think there are probably other and better devices, especially for folks who don't have as much strength to use a device like this, but at least know that this is now an option for other devices out there that you might be able to do this with. the other new one, mapping thumbstick cardinals to buttons. So essentially, what this is we hear feedback that not everyone can isolate specific button presses and hit them. Sometimes it's easier to just like karate chop a joystick into a direction, and the direction that the joystick moves, whether it's up, down, left, right, is mapped to a button of your choice. So you can now do that again on both the adaptive controller and then also on our Elite controller for the thumbsticks on that controller, and then also any joystick device that is attached to the Xbox Adaptive controller. And this might look like, somebody is they're playing a 2D side scroller game and they have a hard time reaching around to the buttons and the bumpers and triggers on an Elite controller. Maybe they map that right stick to the bumpers and triggers and can easily go back and forth between ABXY and the right thumbstick. Or, like I mentioned earlier, having like a large joystick and using a foot or a larger body part if you need to kind of hit it in different directions to have it hit whatever those buttons that you assign it to. And then finally, and this one I'm very, very excited for, the ability to map thumbstick to mouse. Same with the Elite thumbsticks and then also any devices plugged into the adaptive controller. But essentially what you can do, and I have a video showing the remapping UI for the adaptive controller, is you create a new profile, choose the name of the profile, you select either the right or left stick in the adaptive controller remapping UI, and you can now choose from 3 different options. It can function as a stick, it can function as a mouse, or like I mentioned, it can function as a button with the 4 cardinal directions. This is really great for, maybe players who prefer gamepad or controller form factor. It's more accessible to them, but their PC games aren't really playing nicely with gamepad form factors. You can now use controller as mouse and keyboard input. The game won't know otherwise. But what I am most excited for is being able to use your adaptive setup just to control your Windows OS and interact with your computer that way for productivity or fun or whatever you want to do. So I have another video here, and I just have a large joystick. It's plugged into my Xbox Adaptive controller, and it's mapped as mouse cursor movement. And then I have the large button on the right side of the adaptive controller mapped as right mouse click. And I took this, I just finished remapping it. I removed it from my console, I plugged it into my PC, and it just immediately started working as mouse cursor and right click movement. So very excited for some of the opportunities here and being able to, again, use your adaptive setups for more than just gaming on PC scenarios. Okay, let's talk about hardware. So as I mentioned, this past August, we released a program called the Adaptive Thumbstick Toppers. And essentially what this is if you go to the Xbox Design Lab website, and that's typically where you can customize your controllers, you can pick cool colors and shapes, not shapes, you can pick cool colors and designs and that sort of thing. But there is now a new section on that website where you can actually customize 3D printable toppers that attach to your thumbstick to ideally make them more comfortable, larger, just build up the grips on them to aid in whatever kind of adaptive setup that you need. So there are options for again, the Elite controllers, our standard Series X and S controllers, and also the Xbox Adaptive Joystick when it comes out. And the way that it works is you are presented with, wow, that played fast, 6 different shapes. So there's like a sort of a bowl, shallow bowl that is ideal for using your chin, that sort of thing. There's a dome, mushroom topper kind of shape. There's a large cylindrical one, an indented one that looks kind of like a cup. There's a golf ball shaped one, and then even a custom threaded one, which actually lets you take moldable plastics, thermoplastic material, splinting material like Eric was talking about, and attach it right to this custom threaded topper, and it'll hold on to it really well, and you can make any shape that you want. You can mold it to somebody's hand that way. And after you select your shape, oh no. Okay, we're good. After you select your shape, you can then customize the width and the height of that topper. So using just simple sliders, you can, again, make it taller, you can make it wider, any way that you'd like to customize it. There are preset sizes that you can choose from across that sliding scale, and the website will actually show you a real-time render of what that new shape and size will look like on the controller that you're making it for. The best part is when you're done with that, um, it will just print you out a free 3D printable file, completely free. It's complimentary. You can make and print as many as you want and take that either to, a 3D printer if you have access to one, a 3D printing service, that sort of thing, and trial different topper shapes and sizes that may aid in how you use a standard controller or the adaptive joystick. And the background on this one, as with some other great devices, it started off as a hackathon project, and it was the baby of a PM in the hardware organization. His name is Jurgen. And I think initially, when they were doing the hackathon project, they wanted to explore ways that 3D printing can be sort of like an incubator testing thing. We know a lot of players, you don't always know exactly what's going to work for you or what you need until you actually have it in your hand and you're using it and you're manipulating it. And it can be really difficult and cost prohibitive to have to decide on a form factor that's pre-made, injection molded, have it sent to your house. You're very excited just to find out that it's actually not that comfortable or it doesn't meet your mobility needs. So they were just generally looking at how 3D printed designs can be a much more cost effective way to adapt different aspects of gaming and technology. And from there, we started collaborating with different hospitals and maker groups, asking them about the types of adaptive topper shapes that they were creating, what worked best, what did players like the best, and then of course working with players themselves to finalize some of the designs. And I think like what was really interesting is we did get questions from some of our leadership where they were just confused why they were doing this, not in a rude way or a disapproving way. They were just genuinely curious because obviously 3D printing is not a new concept. Neither are thumbstick toppers. Both of those things exist. They've been around for a really long time. But what we were eventually trying to do is address some of the gaps in discoverability and awareness of 3D printed solutions. Having to talk about how not everybody is part of the maker community. Like not everyone scrolls through Thingiverse on a Friday night for fun like I do. Like there are certainly people who would highly benefit from these types of solutions, but until it is easily discoverable on a website like Xbox Design Lab, they might not know that these are available to them. And then on top of that, we also obviously know not everyone knows how to 3D model, how to customize the width and the height of existing shapes that are out there. So by implementing a very simple sliding model, hopefully expanding the reach of what some of these things could do for players. And then finally, the Xbox Adaptive Joystick. So this we also announced this past August at Gamescom. While there is no release or firm release date yet, I can assure you it will be coming in early 2025. It is a small white, it's kind of a Wii nunchuck type form factor. There's the two buttons on the front of it, similar to the Wii nunchuck, but then there's also 4 face buttons right underneath the thumbstick. So there's 6 buttons total. It is intended to be a companion for both the Xbox Adaptive Controller, but then also just generally Xbox controllers in general. You can you can use Xbox Controller Assist, formerly Xbox Copilot, and link it with a standard and elite controller and use it that way. It'll retail for $29.99 online at the Microsoft Store. And I think one of the big things with this is we wanted to make sure that we weren't requiring people to have or use an Xbox Adaptive Controller to use this device. So like I mentioned, it will connect direct to PC or console, no Xbox Adaptive Controller needed. So for anyone who wants to use it in that way, it is a wired device only. And I think some of the benefits of that is, there's no battery and there's no Bluetooth module, which just decreases weight and cost for our players. So the inception for this was really to address feedback from the disability community that it was really difficult to find affordable joysticks for the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And through chatting with the community and just internally, some of the early goals that we established for this product was one, of course, around cost and being as cost conscious as possible. We know that's very, very important. The other one was that it was an ambidextrous device. We weren't limiting players if they were right-handed or left-handed. It was something that anybody could use in that way. They also really wanted to see more buttons than what the PDP one-handed joystick had, which is just the two on the front. And then finally, it was part of the Xbox family. And Chris Kajowski, who is the designer on both this device and the Xbox Adaptive Controller, he always does a really wonderful job of making these devices look amazing. But we know that it's important that our assistive technology doesn't look othering. It doesn't look like a children's toy. It looks cool and part of the Xbox family. So that was something that was important to us as well. And I think he did a really awesome job, as he always does with that. These are some pictures from Chris that he took in his garage as he was designing the early concepts for it. And some of them are very, he calls them primitive. They're just truly like a tube, a cylindrical tube. And then over time, he would polish them, add buttons, give them more ergonomic shapes and designs and that sort of thing until we eventually got to something that actually looked like a one-handed joystick or nunchuck. And as we were going through this design process, we had a lot of design considerations to make. It was very difficult at times, but one of our grounding mantras, as it always is and should be, was nothing about us without us. So from the initial feedback phase and giving us the idea for wanting to pursue something like that with that form factor, to taking these really early polyjet, just a hunk of plastic really where the buttons and the joystick don't even move. We would actually take them to local hospitals, to just different players who lived in the local community, and just have them give us feedback on things like the size of it, how long should the handle be, the width of it, the circumference of it, where should the buttons be placed, and that sort of thing. So it was very much an end to end. We are constantly trying to bring this into the hands of people, or maybe they don't have hands, and get as much feedback as possible in that way. And then some of the other design considerations, the number of buttons. In trying to build a design that was truly ambidextrous, it became really difficult to know where those additional buttons should actually be placed. When you think about something like the Elite controller, it has the paddles on the bottom, but if we were to do some buttons on the side of the device, obviously you would inherently hit them if you are either right or left-handed if they were on the opposite side. So it was a challenge just trying to figure out the best way to do this. There's an image on here and it shows some of the earlier models, and instead of 4 individual circular buttons, which is the final design on the device, kind of like an ABXY shape, some of the early ones had a D-pad on them instead. And we thought about that a lot because a D-pad would kind of make sense, but we also wanted to think about just some of the cognitive barriers and player interactions. We knew that a lot of people wouldn't be mapping these 4 buttons to be a D-pad. They might be mapping them to ABXY or any other button that they might need for their game. So we ultimately decided to make them 4 separate individual buttons. Some of the other feedback that we got early on was the 2 front buttons. We originally didn't, they were completely smooth. They didn't have any texture on them. And we got feedback from players that it was difficult to tell the difference between the upper and lower button. So we added some texture onto the bottom button. So even though you couldn't see where your finger was placed, if you had any kind of diminished sensation, you can feel tactily the difference between those two so you're not accidentally activating the one that you don't want to activate. And then even down to the iconography or the labels on those buttons. So they're not pre-labeled with any of our current Xbox naming terminologies or buttons. They're actually X1 through X6. And that's what you see on the buttons themselves. It's X1, X2, X3, X4 on the 4 front buttons. And we again wanted to consider the fact that people were going to be highly customizing this device and mapping those buttons to a variety of different things. So to pre-establish that this is ABXY by printing that on the label was not something that we wanted to introduce from a cognitive barrier, having to do that translation perspective for anyone that did find it distracting. But we also needed some kind of name on them so we can refer to them in the remapping user interface. One of the questions that I get asked a lot about this device is why a handheld form factor? Why didn't you create sort of like a large tabletop joystick like some of the Warfighter sticks and that sort of thing? And I honestly thought the same thing to myself in early development because I work with so many players who do prefer those large based joystick devices where they have a lot of gross motor movement, and having something with a large base that sits flat on a tabletop is actually the ideal solution for them. But we ended up kind of coming up with not a compromise, but just a way to have the device function in two ways. And that was adding a quarter 20 threaded mount onto the bottom of the device. So for anyone not familiar, that's the same size as a typical camera tripod that you would mount a camera on a mount to. There is one of those on the bottom of the device. So for anyone who does want to use it in a handheld way, they can. It has that nice ergonomic handheld form factor. But if they want to mount it in space, they don't want to hold the weight of it, or they want to use it with a foot or an elbow or another body part, they can also mount it very sturdily and use it that way as well. I think one of the most different and challenging things about working in the hardware space as opposed to the software space is there's very little flexibility. At some point, you have to lock the design. There can only be as many buttons as you choose during that period in time. You can't add more buttons after you're already manufacturing the device. There can only be one shape, one size, one length. And eventually you have to come to terms with whatever decisions you make for that. So that was always very difficult, but I think there is a really, really beautiful way that software and firmware can come together in a nice marriage with hardware and try to mitigate some of those maybe hardware decisions that weren't necessarily the best for every single one of our players, given how many different needs that our players have. So I fully anticipate a lot of folks, and we've already seen it, to use the adaptive joystick again with their foot and not actually press any of the buttons at all. So what we made sure was that you can unmap those 4 buttons on the face, any of the buttons if you wanted to. But so if you are using it in non-traditional ways, you're not using it as a handheld device, you're not accidentally pressing those buttons, you can essentially turn them off. We also wanted to, of course, make sure that it had full Xbox accessories app support. You can remap and customize all of the buttons on the device. You can use Xbox Controller Assist, the shift function, and we also created a very specific new aspect of the remapping UI for the adaptive controller that clearly labels all of the buttons on this joystick device, the X1 through X6, and also the stick. So you can visually see what those functions are and remap them in the context of your full adaptive setup profile. And of course, like I mentioned, we wanted to make sure that the adaptive controller was not a requirement. So we have the same sort of similar remapping and remappability as with our other controllers, but with the adaptive joystick. So I have an image on screen and it shows the remapping UI for when the joystick is connected directly to your console or PC, and there's just lines coming out from each of the buttons and controls on it where you can remap them. So at the end of the day, when we're creating accessible devices, but also just any device, we know that you need to think about accessibility from end to end. So during the design and development, constantly bringing our proof of concepts and our prototypes and then our early development models out to the community and getting feedback to keep iterating on it. But also some of those later things, the packaging. There's nothing worse than being really excited to get your device home and then you can't even unbox it yourself because it's just in a vacuum seal or there's so much tape on it, it's impossible to get off. So the packaging team, they always do a really, really amazing job. They did it with the adaptive controller. They also have a lot of accessible elements in the adaptive joystick packaging as well. Also your marketing. We need to make sure that one, our marketing materials are accessible, but also accurately reflective of the types of players who might be using this device so folks at home can get a true understanding of what the device or the setting or the feature or the game actually does so they can make an informed purchase decision. So when your marketing materials are, very much like romanticized and just not super telling of what the product does, it's really not helping anyone. So it was important to us to show off the product in a nice way, but also of course feature actual users and players who might want to purchase this device and them interacting with it so potential customers can get a true perspective on what this device actually does. And then last but not least, of course, our support documentation, going back to all of those other things that I just talked about. Having really, really crisp materials, factoring in like what is the actuation force to hit the buttons? Is that something that a player can look up so they know whether that pressure is too much for them? That sort of thing. So, as we go through this journey, it's becoming easier and easier, which is super exciting to ensure that accessibility is really thought about and embedded from the entire end-to-end process. And as we see it through, even after it goes out the door, we are factoring in sustaining plans to keep the devices working, keep adding new features to them, and that sort of thing. So that is all I have for you. Thank you all so much. And before I pass the mic back to Tara, I feel like every conference she does this thing where she like goes around and thanks everybody, rightfully so. But before she goes and thanks everybody else, can we please get a huge round of applause for Tara and Ian for putting on the conference?